Sorry.
Right. Thank you, Usama and Rabia, for joining us. We are now live, and we'll just come to the introduction parts and the talk and the theme of the talk in just a bit. I would just like to check if everything is working on Facebook by just rechecking whether our live is going on. And with that, also to share the link with you both so that you could perhaps put it on your own Facebooks and on your own Twitter timeline. I still am waiting for it to see us. I do not see it yet. Just give me a few seconds to check once more. I'm just restarting the. Yes, we are live with and the books and on your own. So you'll see the link on your own WhatsApp. So if you would like to reshare it on your own pages, and I'm just going to do the same with my page. Right. Okay, so thank you again, Usama and Rabia, for joining us. Just a little bit of an introduction to the talk that we have today. We're going to be discussing the new social media rules that the Pakistani government has introduced and is going to be implementing in the next few months. We're going to be finding out when exactly that will happen, also from our guests, and we'll be focusing on the fact that this law, that the act that was already in place, the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, PECA, in 2016, how it has sort of it's being further strengthened to come after dissent, to come after people who might have a different point of view on especially on social media, and also why there was this need to bring these rules, these changes, and what has been the consultation process and what can be the impact of it. To discuss all of this and more, we are being joined by Usama Khilji, who's a part of Bolobhi, a digital rights organization, and he's a digital rights activist. He writes about digital rights in Pakistan for Dawn newspaper. Also with us is Rabia Mehmood, who's an independent journalist and an activist. She was associated with Amnesty International very recently, working on South Asia, and before that she's been working with international and local media. To begin with, I would like to first go to Usama and just right away ask, what are these social media rules? If you could tell our viewers what is the government's reasoning or justification for bringing them in? Why are they changing or bringing these additional sort of rules to Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act 2016?
Thank you, Taha. Very nice to speak with you and be joined by Rabia, and thank you for inviting us. So the new rules, they're called I think Removal and Blocking of Online Content Rules 2020. So they're actually rules that stipulate how Section 37 of PECA, which is the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, is to be implemented. Now, let's look at what the Section 37 of PECA is. So it's essentially the section of the law that deals with unlawful online content, which basically is the censorship clause of the cybercrime law. So this law was brought in 2016, and for 4 years we haven't had rules on how the procedure for blocking and removal of content online will be. And that's what these rules are supposed to do, right? So they're supposed to say, okay, what is going to be the procedure, the notice, the hearing, the appeal, and all of those things, and the protections and the safeguards. So these rules try to do that, but they go beyond their purview. They go beyond the purview of the Parent Act. They add a lot more clauses and a lot more definitions to the law. And what they're also doing is, and a lot of legal experts have argued this, they're also stepping outside the Constitution. So essentially, they're pretty unconstitutional as well. Now, why is that? So Section 37, it's called unlawful online content. And these rules talk about how blocking and removal of that is supposed to be done. So most human rights organizations in Pakistan have already criticized the very existence of Section 37 because we argue and believe that this is a tool of censorship in the hands of the state and the government. Because through this, they're trying to bully social media companies to restrict or block a lot of content. And it's also been used to censor a lot of websites. So, for example, before the 2018 election, we saw the website of the Awami Workers Party, which is a political party, their website being blocked in Pakistan before elections. So we can see how much it has been abused. We've also seen Section 37 being used by the government to make requests to social media companies to block content on the internet and to also restrict content and to access user data related to content online. So Taha, I'm sure you've gotten a lot of notices as well from social media companies. So for example, Twitter is saying that we've received a notice from the government of Pakistan. And you've had your website blocked as well. And that's also, using Section 37 they're doing. So let's talk a bit about what the rules say. So in these rules, they're basically defining a lot of the terms. So Section 37 uses language from the Constitution of Pakistan, the Article 19, so which deals with freedom of speech. And then there are a few provisos that says, every citizen shall have freedom of speech and press freedom in Pakistan, provided for reasonable restrictions. So these restrictions are supposed to be reasonable and interpreted by higher judiciary, right? But what we see happening is that the PTA is getting to interpret this language of the Constitution. And then secondly, they talk about the glory of Islam. They talk about the defense, security, and integrity of Pakistan. They talk about public order, and they talk about obscenity and morality, right? Decency and morality. और फिर in rules में इन्होंने कोशिश की है कि ये जो सारे all these provisos, they've tried to define those further. Now, how have they defined that? They've picked up clauses from the Pakistan Penal Code. So, for example, for the glory of Islam clauses, they've picked up the blasphemy laws in the Penal Code and said the definition of this applies to online content, which, by the way, the PTA gets to analyze or interpret and define, right? And then for a public order, they've picked up Section 144 of the PPC, which we know has been used to restrict freedom of association, in times of protest, etc. And then they've picked up language from Section 509 of the PPC and others, which deals with harassment, etc., for obscenity and morality, or obscene songs, etc. So what we're really seeing is additional language, additional laws, and additional powers being given to PTA to basically define what is unlawful online content and then get to send these requests to social media companies. Now, what the other clauses then say that the community standards in terms of service that all social media companies already have will be null and void, and the rules that I just talked about outlined by the PTA will be the only ones that social media companies will implement, that they have to display these rules for users in Pakistan online. And if social media companies don't comply with these rules within 24 hours and 6 hours in emergency cases, then the PTA has the power to block the entire platform for access in Pakistan. And there's also a 500 million rupee fine, which is roughly more than $3 million on these social media companies, right? And then they're also asking them to open local offices in Pakistan to assign, local representatives and to open a local database of all their data in Pakistan related to Pakistani social media users. And they want all of that user data to be given to the FIA in decrypted and readable form. So just a brief overview of what these rules are, and that's pretty much what they're saying.
Right. One thing that we do see that this time around also, and the last time around when the PECA was introduced in 2016, the consultation process was minimal to say, and there was no consultation from the civil rights community, from the human rights activists, from digital rights activists. Rabia, you've been working with different organizations, and you've been doing human rights advocacy and digital rights advocacy. In your sort of opinion, and in your experience, have you seen that the government wants to have a consultation process? Because they will keep saying that this is for the in some ways this is the rules are for to improve the experience of people on internet, to improve the way the internet works in Pakistan. But do you see that this is the government is actually true in that way, or the government has ulterior motives and it's just using this idea of protecting the public?
I think, Taha, to begin with, I really want to say that this really is part of the larger campaign to muzzle dissent and the larger crackdown on expression in Pakistan, which has gone on for years but has strengthened in the past 2 or 3 years. PECA was one, and it isn't really on to the current government, except of course during the current time it has really it's gone to the other level. But all of this was coming our way step by step. There were ominous signs which existed there, the PSAs that the government has been running, the kind of conversation that has happened in the parliament by Muhammad Ali Khan, who is from with the PTI. And this was and the way, thank you Usama, the way Usama has explained it, I was just listening to him very calmly. But this is all quite scary. It's not just scary for activists and dissidents and people like us and journalists, but it is these are going to violate human rights of a basic citizen. Citizen, it could be a mom of three who's using internet and expressing something. It could be a student artist from NCA. It could be a gentleman who's retired and interested in Pakistani politics and 60 years old and commenting on his Facebook or posting on his Facebook and Twitter. It turns everybody into a dissident. It turns it the way the state is looking at everyone through this lens of paranoia, basically, and turns everyone into criminal. Basically, it's a criminalization of speech taken to the next level. And no, in my opinion, very very humble, very very humble opinion, yes, there are people within the government. When we say government, I mean the current government as well and the previous government as well, because PECA was being passed during the last government. And I know that Bolobhi and other organizations like DRF and Bites for All and other activists have very consistently been trying to engage with the government more than, like, say, other organizations, because this is their in their work profile. But there are individuals within the governments that are interested in listening to activists, but and on some legislation, it depends on from legislation to legislation, issue to issue as well. We do know that the transgender right bills was very heavily kind of like, it was a result of the kind of work that activists had done with the governments, and that's why it did address, it was a progressive legislation, and also it reflected the kind of work which went into it. But when it comes to legislations like PECA and rules like this, and say, for instance, we've been hearing that Pakistan might criminalize enforced disappearances at some point. That Pakistan might criminalize torture at some point. The government has been talking about it. When it comes to such legislations, which are about control, in which the people who are going to the violator of the laws are either the government or the authorities that we don't talk about, like the intelligence agencies and about the Pakistan military, for instance. On such matters, there is little consultation. On such matters, there is a lack of transparency, basically. Yes, we do have a culture of lack of transparency in Pakistan. If I can say this, I am generalizing, but I do think it's true. But when it comes to specific kind of work, specific kind of legislation, at that time, the kind of input that should be taken from the rights organizations is not taken into account. And I have said this before, that in Pakistan, activists in civil society and rights organizations, they do a lot of work, be them lawyers or activists, researchers, campaigners, they do a lot of work. They do their maximum. But there's also this like culture where, it's the state would do what it wants to do.
Right.
It's very obvious from these rules that it just like sat down and said, we're going to ban everything. We're going to make sure that first we control the electronic media, print media. And as we've seen in the past 2 years, that internet has been the primary source of information, on when there was so much overwhelming censorship. So, it goes against,
Right, and definitely. I mean, this is the last point in your conversation, and earlier also the paranoia of the government and the intolerance we see that that keeps on increasing. We keep seeing that the government first was going after mainstream media. They went after the television media. Then they went after the print media, first in local languages and then in English languages also. And there's been a sort of a gradual sort of a push towards being completely intolerant. Usama, do you think that there is any hope? Because I was talking to you earlier on and you said that it seems like they're going to go ahead and do all of this. And as Rabia is saying, that there is no consultative process also. If they want to do it, they will go ahead and do it. Do you think that there is still some hope and there is still some room that the government will back off? Because, I mean, from what we understand, the social media companies have said that they will not agree with this. They will perhaps pack up their bags. They've threatened that. What do you think? And at this moment, I just like to say that we have around 22 people live with us. So if there are any comments, any suggestions, any questions, you can ask us live. Yes, Usama, please.
We just have to keep hoping if we want things to be better. And that's why we're always trying to find one way or the other out of these situations, right? So let's look at what the situation is right now. The rules say that within 9 months, the companies have to set up their offices and they have to basically bring in their database. I think it's about 18 months, subject to the data protection law. And allocate people. So if they don't open offices within 9 months, now we'll see what happens next. But before that, I think, on paper, we're a democratic country, and in some ways, those functions do continue to take place. So we have a judiciary, we have an executive, we have a parliament. So our recommendation throughout has been that the executive, which is the cabinet, should take back these rules because they're bad if you consider basic rights that your constitution guarantees us, and B, they're bad for the economy. Because if you're going to be implementing arbitrary blocks and bans, you create a bad environment for investors. You create panic for your local social media and internet industry, and your IT exports are somewhere more than $1 billion, and I think the undocumented number is something like $3 billion. If we're going to bring in these restrictions on the economy, on internet and social media, then the economy suffers, right? And already unemployment is high, and already there is a dismal situation economically. So really, the government doesn't have much choice but to make sure that the tech sector, the innovation sector, of which social media plays a very fundamental and central role, that it's protected, right? So first of all, that's the hope that they realize this. And that's what the noise has been about ever since these rules were passed. And then secondly, we have the parliament. And we've seen the opposition parties being very vocal about democracy, starting a Pakistan Democratic Movement. And the second hope is that the parliament will speak up. The opposition parties, together will take note of this through the parliamentary committees on IT and human rights, in which they can take note of it, ask the government for more accountability, and use the existing mechanisms to maybe amend the PECA law and really clip the wings of the PTA in the way they're going on about censorship. And then thirdly, we have the courts. So like I said, there's a lot of legal issues within these rules, and most importantly, they violate fundamental rights, right? So in one of the rules, if I may quote some of the parts of it. So they give the one to do with integrity, defense, and security of Pakistan. So the rules talk about defining these officials and institutions using the language of Article 260 of the Constitution, which defines who is Chief Justice or Prime Minister or Chief of Staff or President, etc. Right? And then they add extra language to that in the rules, saying that whoever creates disaffection towards the government or harms the reputation of the federal or provincial government or any public official. And no mention of even malicious intent that all laws usually do, right? So they're just saying, oh, if you're harming the reputation of the government or of any public official. So that's pretty much any criticism of government by any citizen of Pakistan. And I think Rabia, really well explained that this is not just about your leftist dissidents or your, right-wing revolutionaries that you have these days. It's about every single Pakistani person that uses social media to say, okay, the government is not doing something right, and this is what they should do. And, they're tax-paying citizens. They cast votes. They have all the right to do this. So I think keeping in mind such broad language that this rules give. And by the way, when they're telling the social media companies that within 24 hours, if you don't comply with the request, we're going to block your entire platform, that actually contradicts Section 38 of PECA, which talks about limited intermediary liability. And all these internet companies are intermediaries, right? And they're not responsible for the content, or they can't be criminally held liable for what third-party users are posting on their platforms. So keeping in mind all these legal loopholes and all these legal really, flaws, and I think whoever made these rules was either really bad at law and technology or just has very malicious intent, because in the current draft, it's not going to be hopefully acceptable to any court either. So that's our third hope, that hopefully the courts will take notice. And I think a lot of people have said that they're going to go to court. So for example, the Internet Service Providers of Pakistan, Internet Service Provider Association has said that they're going to go to court against these, and civil society organizations are also considering that. So hopefully some sense is going to prevail.
Rabia, as Usama mentions, some sense, prevalence of some sense. Do you think that in the Pakistani media, when you watch the Pakistani media, when you read the Pakistani news, are they creating this pressure in the coming months for the government to sort of back off, or the government to review? Do we see that? Or I mean, today we're doing this talk. We've seen Bolobhi has been doing a lot of activism. We've seen other organizations coming out and doing some debates, but those are the very organizations that the government is not consulting. The mainstream media. How do you see the mainstream media's role, and should the mainstream media do more in stopping this from happening?
So I want to start by saying that I don't watch a lot of news anymore. I do read it regularly, and because my source of information to a large degree were some of the accounts that I knew. I mean, if I want to see what a journalist is saying, I would rather see what he's tweeting at times than to read his story, because there were kinds of stories which were not allowed to be published, or that could not be broadcasted on Pakistani press. So and that just goes to show how important platforms are for us, and how journalists as well are using more and more journalists are opening up YouTube channels specifically, and asking for subscription for proper analysis of news, not just those in Islamabad, but in elsewhere as well. In Balochistan, in KP, in Sindh, I've seen that as an increasing trend. It's a trend everywhere, and also in Pakistan. But yes, we do see people like Usama given space on Urdu news channels, which means that kind of opinion does get broadcasted in talk shows, and that is happening, but it is nowhere near enough. I think the press needs to do more, and because the media, by press I mean electronic media as well, and print media, are going to be so heavily affected by that. They're already been hit by the censorship of the past 2.5 years. So they have to do more. Also, it's nowhere near, like, it's not the kind of crisis that this is going to be. And the way Osama has explained that it's going to have repercussions for the economy as well, and for a common citizen as well. And it's not just about people critiquing the government because of disappearances or something. There's so much more to it. So there is that. We're not doing enough. And I think it needs to be, even for the rights organizations, now I'm just giving free advice, is that for campaigns as well, it has to be, more of it needs to be done in mainstream media and Urdu newspapers as well, because English press is publishing very sensible editorials, op-eds. You can read Dawn or the news and you pretty much have an idea of what is happening. And, but we have people like Osama also writing regularly about this in a very articulate way, and others as well. But we need more conversation in Urdu. We need more campaigning in Urdu, and because I would just repeat what I said earlier, and Usama said that it is about everyday citizen. It impacts everything they're putting out online, and they need to be told that it's a problem. It's your rights which are going to be affected, and not journalists and activists who are already demonized in the country, right? Because I feel like it's just like all of us are. So, and that's what needs to be highlighted. And also the already marginalized groups, they're going to be affected. Even before 2018, I would go back to like 2012, 2013. Social media gave a lot of space to the ethnic and religious minorities and sexual and gender related minorities as well, to not just post about the way they were discriminated against, not just post about the attacks that they were facing in Pakistan, like from like big attacks on, like, say, graveyard of Ahmadis being vandalized somewhere in Punjab would appear on Twitter first. And a lot of people will find out about it from Twitter. And attacks on transgenders in, say, Peshawar or elsewhere, you would see that story or that conversation or that information online first, and then it would get picked up by activists and journalists, and they would verify it further and follow up on it. And it's the same for Facebook. And we know on ethnic minorities, we know what's happening with the PTM, before that the Baloch and Sindhis as well, and in fact information from GB as well, right? So these are the groups which are already so targeted. They found their voice on these platforms, and they are going to be so impacted by this. And it's going to further make them more vulnerable, further, the repression that they have faced in society. They're not going to be able to very openly talk about things. And I'm not even have not even gone to the realm, to the thing which is blasphemy online, blasphemous content, right? We haven't even gone there at the way internet is used to target them, and pick up the minorities posts. And then it's, we have 295C and 295AB, 298ABC, the law which targets the PPC amendment, which targets Ahmadis, the way it's been sort of interpreted in terms of their internet expression, or public or private conversations are being, have been used as an excuse to file a blasphemy case against them. And it happens, and people are, at the moment, there are people on death row in Pakistan having committed blasphemy online, and so but that needs to be also it means us and others, we need to talk more about this. And of course, when the press is talking about this, the mainstream media is nowhere getting into this conversation in depth, because yeah.
Right. Definitely the mainstream media needs to do a lot more. And we see that the mainstream media, as you mentioned rightly, that Usama does get a bit of a say in the mainstream media. But then again, there's a lot of the mainstream media sort of narrative is that the internet needs to be controlled by the Pakistani sort of government. It's there's this whole narrative that the state needs to push its own sort of narrative, and around the world we see sort of similar examples. And one of the similar sort of examples that we see is just across in our neighborhood in China, where there's this great internet firewall, and they have their own social media networks, and which are heavily censored, and they do not have these international media social media platforms. Usama, do you think that is this the vision that the government has, that they want to create their own sort of networks? I remember, because I remember this was an experiment that was done also earlier, back in early 2010s. I'm not sure exactly which year, but when Facebook was banned,
Millet Facebook.
Yeah, Millet Facebook came up, and I went in and spoke to the people who brought it in. I did a story on it, and it was just basically because at that time Facebook was banned, so then people started going to Millet Facebook, but nobody really, it didn't pick up, and we didn't see that traction. And then eventually Facebook was unbanned, and Facebook and people came back on it, and then a lot of people at that time were using VPNs and stuff. So I think, is this the future that the Pakistani government has in mind, that we're going to replicate the Chinese model?
Taha, we've been experiencing online censorship since 2006, when I think Blogger was blocked. And then 2010, we saw Facebook briefly blocked. And then 2012, we saw YouTube blocked for 4 years. And all of these were related to blasphemy, right? That some idiot committed in some corner of the world, and the government decided to punish, all of Pakistan's population for it. And that's the sort of the approach, right? And then, in China, all of these platforms don't work. But what's interesting is, I was in China 2 years ago, and I was using Instagram, I was using Facebook, I was using Twitter, I was using WhatsApp through VPNs, right? And some VPNs don't work there, so I would use another VPN, right? And that just really goes to show that it's not very easy to implement a ban. It's not very easy to implement a block. I remember when YouTube was blocked in Pakistan, I was teaching younger kids in school, and when I mentioned the YouTube ban, and they started laughing, they were like, "Sir, what ban? We all have hotspot shield. We can access YouTube, right?" And I think this just points to the ignorance of how technology works in policy-making circles, where they think that the same approach that they have towards electronic and print media will work on the internet. But the internet is not a registered, TV channel that you can bully or disappear their workers or try to kill them. And that's probably why internet companies don't want to set up offices here, because of those precedents that exist, right? But think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the internet works and how it's possible to control it, because it really isn't possible to control people on the internet the way you can otherwise and the way they have, right? But certainly, I think the romanticism must be of China or of Turkey, where we've seen very similar rules come in. And in a very similar fashion, the internet companies in Turkey have also refused to comply with those rules. And the world over, we're trying to see this increasing, effort to hold intermediaries liable. And to put more responsibility on them. And yes, that is a very important debate to have, where platforms also have responsibilities, right? But at the same time, the government cannot take up all that control over information, try to censor content, and try to, make a China out of Pakistan, because our constitution, our system of government are fundamentally different, and our people are fundamentally different. Nobody's going to accept such censorship on the internet. We've seen how PUBG and TikTok and all these websites and apps were banned this year, but we saw how much protest they were by the smaller communities of gamers, for example, who are now very aware of censorship and who are angry. So, I'm glad a video game was blocked, because it gave a wake-up call to a lot of people that didn't otherwise care about censorship, and now they realize what the government's really capable of. So I think, again, I would reiterate, like, trying to use the existing systems and try to equip the government and policymakers with more technical knowledge of how the system works. B, equip the courts and the judiciary on how to look at these cases, right? And I think that's the sort of push we need from within our society. And like Rabia said, people who are going to be affected need to be speaking up more as well as, the media, of course.
Right. Just one last question, and then we'll wrap up the debate. Rabia, do you, Usama's kept mentioning the fact that there should be a sort of a considered effort from the politicians, from opposition, from the parliament, from the citizens you were mentioning, from the courts, which is sort of one of the last hopes that we have. In your advocacy, in your activism, in your experience, do you think that the Pakistani courts are a place where something like this, they will review it and they will probably block it and stop it? Do you expect that kind of resistance from the courts?
I just want to, because Usama was talking about the 4-year Facebook ban and the previous, YouTube ban and the previous Facebook bans. And I remember when Facebook was banned for the first time, and there was an honorable retired judge in Lahore High Court. And it's a bit of a nugget that who banned or blocked Facebook. And then he said that, what exactly is Facebook in Punjabi? So it's so true what Usama is said, that there is very little understanding of how technology works, how these platforms and apps work, in fact. I do think that the courts are our hope. For sure, and we've seen that even with some big cases, not just these ones, but generally, session courts and lower courts are not our hopes. And ATC isn't. If there is a ban on someone's, if there's a PECA case against someone for their tweet and Facebook, on Facebook post, and then they're also charged with an ATA, which happens a lot in some cases, that FIR is a PECA FIR, but it also includes the ATA charges, then those are not our hopes. But yes, the High Court, Lahore High Court, Islamabad High Court, Peshawar and Sindh, and the Supreme Court are people have gone to have filed cases, and then eventually we've seen that there are some judges who are very progressive, the way they interpret the law, but also the way they understand society and repression. So and we see that if a case goes to a particular judge in Islamabad High Court, we are like, okay, we have some hope that things would be okay. So they are likely to pick up. I feel like this is what we've seen in the past few years as well. The way citizens have engaged with the court, there was always this engagement, but now even more so. Like Usama was mentioning, that it's going to be challenged if it hasn't been challenged already. The rules, and yes, I would. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There is, we have that for Pakistani citizens do have that. Yes, hopefully it won't come to that we have to go to Supreme Court, and that's our last hope, right? Like the last sort of what happens is now we go right to the human rights section of the Supreme Court and file a petition with them. Yeah, hopefully it won't come to that.
Right. Thank you, both of you, for joining us today with this small chat and sort of a very insightful chat into what the government wants to introduce and what the government is planning to do and where the resistance can come from. And as both of you mentioned rightly, this is very counterproductive, and it doesn't. These kind of bans do not really stop people from getting on the internet. There are, in a world which is so digital, in a world which is accustomed to the digital economy in this way, it's not just going to be counterproductive from an informational point of view, but also from a digital economy point of view. And that is why the government needs to review and sort of one of the first things that it needs to do is that it needs to involve the right stakeholders, the people that are involved in digital rights activism, and involve them in sort of and bring in a consultative process to make the internet safer. Definitely, the internet needs to be safe. There is definitely in the West also there are rules that are in place, but those rules have a lot of judicial process, a lot of due process, and those perhaps need to be looked upon and reviewed upon rather than having these sort of aims and sort of these ambitions to create blanket bans on social media. Once again, thank you for all of those who joined us on South Asia Press. We're going to be continuing to do these kind of talks on South Asia Press in the coming weeks on different issues from Pakistan. We'd request all of you to follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. And we'll see you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.